get started.
Of course, the cat's going to climb up here and crawl right in front of me.
That's okay. Good afternoon, Houston scholars. And I know we have some visitors from out of state as well, which is very cool. My name is Linda Besmer, and I'm with Muses 3. And I'd like to cover just a couple of basics here today for all of our visitors. We do have everyone muted and have your video turned off just to ensure the privacy of all of our students who might be viewing this webinar. If you do have any questions, you can use the Q&A button, which should be found at the bottom of your screen. So if you would use that to communicate, and I'll be monitoring that and make sure that I get any questions to our guest speaker today. Our photography hobbyist is Frank DiVito. He lives in Ohio and currently works for GE. And I'm going to let him give you a little bit more of his background. I've known Frank for, gosh, almost 38 years now. And so he's a longtime family friend and gave us an absolutely beautiful HDR photograph for Christmas that he had, a photo that he had taken. So when we were looking at doing different activities, I thought of Frank, and he walked us through the process. It's really, really a very cool process. So I thought this might be something that others would benefit from as well. So Frank, I'm going to turn the audio and the video over to you.
Okay. Everybody bear with me now. I'm not super experienced with Zoom, some experience, but if I screw up, just bear with me. I'll get it straight. Like Linda said, I am just an amateur photographer. I want to make sure everyone realizes that I'm not a professional photographer, and I have no aspirations to be one. I do photography for myself. I was a photographer back in my 20s for quite a while, got away from it for many years. And then in about 2015, I saw this photograph displayed in a gallery, and I just was amazed by it. And I started asking questions, and they said it was an HDR photograph, and I started researching it a little bit. And I went out and bought my first camera in 20 years after that. They're very interesting photos. They're fun to do. They look great. And I do them mainly for myself. I really, I don't care about the opinions of what professional photographers might say about my stuff. And if you see it, you may or may not like my photos. So that's okay. I just started this last year, actually preparing some for people for gifts. So some people have shown an interest. So I hope you get enough out of this to pique your interest and then go on and do more research into it. I'm going to share my screen for you, and hopefully this shows up nicely for you. 1 second. Why am I not seeing that here? Tab. Bear with me. Share screen. Okay, that was it. Oh. Nope, that's not what I want. Linda, of course, this is not acting like I thought it would. I can't see the, oh, there it is. Okay.
There you go.
All right, everybody. Sorry about that. It'll probably glitch me up again whenever I try to do the hands-on kind of demo for you. But just so you know, HDR is defined as high dynamic range photography. What it is that what you're doing is you're taking multiple photos and merging them together. And the reason you do that is you take a photo that is exposed exactly the way it should be, so it looks like a normal photo. And then you overexpose one photo and you underexpose one photo. And what you're doing is you are pulling the, when you combine the photos together, the software takes the details out of the overexposed image for the areas that are in shadow. And then on the underexposed image, anything that is glared out in a normal photo will have detail. And so it takes those details from the glare areas and the shadowed areas, and it pulls them into the main photo. And so by doing that, you get much more detail. You can see a wider range of the picture. And you can do this using either 3 photos or a minimum of 3 photos, or you can go ahead and use more than that if your camera can do it. Some cameras can shoot 5 shots, 7 shots, or 9 shots. And a very professional camera will shoot actually 9 photographs, and you combine those together. They must be post-processed, so you have to have a piece of software to put these together at the end. And I'll show you Photomatix Pro is what I bought. It wasn't very expensive, and it's got a pretty good reputation. So the dynamic range means you're increasing the range of what can be seen in the photograph and the exposure, okay? So this shows you an example. This is not my photograph, but I got a couple of these to show you real quickly exactly what can result from applying HDR. This is a normal photograph. This is what the one photograph that will fall in the middle of the exposures, if you take 3 exposures, will look like. And then when they're combined together, you can pull the details. You can see the details pulled out of the clouds. These were probably taken a few minutes apart, so the clouds are slightly different, but you can see the details in the clouds and the waves and the rocks that you cannot see in the normal photo. Another example, here you have a shoreline here that shows some cliffs that are pretty interesting. And if you apply the HDR to it, you can pull amazing amounts of color and detail out of it. Now, one thing to realize is that, and this is one reason that when professional photographers say, you know, it's gimmicky because you're adding color. Well, you're not really adding color. You're increasing and you're decreasing the intensity of the colors that are actually captured in the photo. So you're not really adding any colors to the photo. You're just intensifying the colors that you want. You're muting any colors that you don't want, and you're pulling more detail out of the photos. So it gives you an idea of what can be done professionally. What do you need to do this? In back of me, you'll see my camera set up. The camera, and I realize some of your students, your parents probably have cameras that are as good or better than mine. Many people have the DSLRs, the digital single lens reflex. And what that means is there's a mirror inside of it that allows you to see through the lens when you're looking through the viewfinder, and then the mirror pops out of the way whenever you take the picture. The first camera I had was a single lens reflex, an SLR camera, but it was the first camera that Canon had that it had programs in it so that the camera would figure out how to expose the picture. I did take photography classes, and I understand how to do traditional photography, but to me, it's more fun to let the camera do the grunt work and then do these other types of photography on top of it that allow me to use the camera to its best extent. You're going to need, you know, a high capacity storage card for the camera, because when you take these multiple photos, and you usually take multiple sets, they tend to get very large because of the format you take them in. And then for about $100, you can get a pretty good tripod here. They're on the internet, and you can get one that I think it's Monsoto or something like that is the one that I have, and it's really nice tripod. Then the software. You can find shareware for HDR on the internet. You probably, if you get to like it a little bit, you'll probably want to buy a piece of software, and you can probably get one for about $60 or a little bit more. Okay, so as far as setting up your camera, what I'm going to show you is how to set up a Canon camera. Many of the Canon cameras will be similar. Some of them will be able to take more shots than mine does. Mine is a TI5 or T5i Rebel Canon camera. And so I'll show you how to set this one up. You'd have to look it up for your own camera. So the first thing you do is you set the camera to aperture bias, which means what it's going to do is you're going to set the aperture of the photo, and that will not change. So you go ahead and you lock in an ISO setting, and you set it on aperture bias here, and so the aperture will not change then. And then you go in here, and you can see on the upper right there, it says ISO auto. It's the default on most of the cameras. You'll want to go into that setting, pull it up here to where it allows you to set the different ISO settings. And then you want to set that to anywhere between 100 and 400, 800, around there. You want to set it actually as low as possible. You may want to shoot photos at different ISO settings or groups of photos at different ones to see how it changes at different times. So then if you'll see on the right below where it says AV on there in the upper left-hand corner, there's an exposure compensation area of the settings. You want to go into that, and then it'll show you this range of, and here's where you can slide this bar one way or the other using the roller on the camera. And what you do with this is that you can see this says exposure comp AEB setting, and that is auto exposure bracketing setting. So you're going to look for an AEB setting on your camera. And when you go in there to do that, then you use either on the Canon, it's this roller type thing on there. You go ahead and roll that, and it will spread these bars, the ones below the main bar there. You can go ahead and you can use the roller to slide them out, and what it's setting is how different is the compensation going to be for the various exposures. So dead center is the photo that's going to be taken that is exposed exactly how it should be, and then the left-hand one is the underexposure, and the right-hand is the other exposure. You want it to be at about the 2. You see how it's what that's considered is 2 EVs, and that's exposure variations or something like that. So I got a glossary of terms that I can send anybody who needs it, but 2 EVs is what's recommended for the separation between the photos. So then you want to go into your camera and go into the drive mode, which is where you set it so that it can take multiple shots. You set it to continuous shooting. And then the way mine works is you select continuous shooting, but then you go back in there and you also select self-timer. And I set mine to 2 seconds. And what that'll do is it allows me to hit the button to shoot the photograph, and then it will time 2 seconds out and then shoot, so that I'm not shaking the camera whenever it goes off. It's important that the camera be very sturdy. If it's windy or if you're unsturdy, there are some ways you can compensate for that and hopefully use the photos. And I'll show you that when I show you the software. It has some compensation for that. So the last thing you want to set on the camera is your image quality, and you want to set that to RAW. You can see that it also allows you to do the RAW plus extra large. You could do that, but you're just going to burn up more space on your storage. So you want to set it to RAW though. RAW photographs are between 25 and 100 megabytes in size. They're very large, and they have a lot of detail to them. So once you're set up there, look at the exposure compensation area that I pointed out. It has a slash at 0, and then one at 2, and one at -2. You've got your ISO locked in at 400 on this one. And then it's on continuous shooting at 2-second intervals. One thing I did not mention that I will now is that the focus or the light metering, you can see that next to where it says raw. You want to set that to evaluate the lighting because you want it to get the lighting setting from the entire picture if you can. You might want to try other things when you're doing this also though. Okay, so now I'm going to try to jump out here and do a live presentation of that. Linda, can you see my screen okay there?
What we're seeing is the PowerPoint, so you may need to, we're seeing the PowerPoint not in slideshow mode, but still seeing the PowerPoint.
So, stop share. How did we do this before?
I think you stopped sharing your screen, and then when you went back.
Okay. And then I'm
and when you went back to share your screen, you were able to select which window you wanted to share.
Okay. Share screen. Okay. You there now?
Yep. Yeah, so now we're in the photo matrix.
Yeah.
Photomatics.
Yep. Photomatics Pro. My version is the 5.1 64-bit. And so this package is made for doing HDR photographs and combining them together. You can see up here in the upper left, it says load bracketed photos, or you can load a single photo and you can do photo post-processing using single photos. I'll show you some examples of some of mine that I did later on in this, and you'll be able to see that even if you do not have 3 exposures, you can still, by just adjusting the contrast and the hues, you can pull a lot of details out. It's just a nice program for doing that. And then in the lower left here, you can see there's some ways to do batches, so that if you've got several of these you want to do at a time, you can go ahead and put batches in through the process. So I'm going to flip out here and go to some photos that I took earlier. Okay. And so this is 3 photos on the lower part here that you can see. Can you see that, Linda?
No, we're still seeing the software.
Okay. This is a little bit different than the software I'm used to using, so bear with me. I can flip between things in that. So, okay. I want to show you where these photos are coming from. So now you can see it, right?
Yes. Yep.
On the bottom here, you'll see 3 photos that are of a railroad track in Bangladesh. I got to go to Bangladesh here recently. The center photo is what a normal photograph would look like. The one on the left is overexposed and the one on the right is underexposed. And so it's going to take, on that photo on the left, it's going to take any of the shadows and it's going to take the detail out of that. And like I said, on the right-hand photo, it's going to take things from areas that would be glared out in the normal photo. So I'm going to select those 3 photos and I'm going to put them into Photomatics. And I can just do this and drag them to do the program and drop them down in there. So now once I have them there, I'm going to have to stop sharing and flip over again, I think. So, okay. Okay. Am I back?
Yes, you are. Yep.
Okay. So you can see now it's asking me, do I want to merge these for HDR processing? And yes, I do. So I'll say okay. It's showing me which ones they are. I can add photos to it. And I can also display the 32-bit unprocessed image also. A lot of people get confused because a technicality is that an HDR photo is actually a very specific format that the programs use to combine them together. So when you save it out of the software, it'll actually save it as a JPEG. It'll be a lot smaller, or you can save it as a TIFF, which will be larger, but will keep a lot of the detail. And but the HDR photo is actually the 32-bit, which has a lot of the detail in it. So I'm going to say, okay, it pulls up another window that allows you to set some of the things for merging. I want it to align the source images, so it's going to make sure that everything's matching up. If you're shooting by hand, you can set this over here so that, you know, your handheld with large shifts, minimal shifts, whatever, it will try to compensate as it's aligning the images. And then you can also set how much you'll allow it to correct for perspective and some other things like that. You don't have to know exactly what every one of these does. As you get better at it, you just dig in a little bit deeper as time goes on. You also have options for removal of ghosts. You can see that here. In some cases, I've taken photos where there's actually cars moving through the thing as we're taking multiple photos. And so what you'll have is streaks of, you know, because these vehicles were moving through the photo as the various ones were being taken. You can use this remove ghosts and actually select areas for it to remove things that were moving at the time that the photo was taken, and you can eliminate some of that. But we're getting into more tricky things when you start doing that. You want to reduce noise on the photo. Noise is, as the processing is happening and the way the camera captures the image, there can be aberrations in there. You'll see also they have a selection here for reduce chromatic aberrations. I know it all sounds a little bit strange, but what it's doing is it's looking for things in the photos that obviously shouldn't be there, and it's correcting for them when it can. This software actually even can recognize what camera you took the photo with, and I believe it does some lens corrections for that. But you can go ahead and then set the raw conversion settings down at the bottom. You usually don't have to touch these. You can set it to as shot, and it will be fine. I did shoot this in daylight, so I'm going to select that. And the Adobe, there's some ways that you can output the color in various ways, but I always leave it on Adobe RGB. So all I do then is hit Align and Merge to HDR. And it will take those 3 photos. This takes a little bit of time, but it's converting the raw photographs first. It's then going to combine those together. You can see that it's doing noise reduction on each one of the photos separately before it combines them. And then it will do the corrections for any chromatic aberrations. And what that is that it's looking for, especially where there's edges where the photos were put together, they might not match up exactly, and you'll end up with some strangeness along the edges of objects, and it will go ahead and remove as much of that as it can. It aligned them, now it's merging them into the HDR photo. And when it first displays them, it's gonna pick a default set of settings that was the last ones that I used for the last photo. So now it's doing the reducing chromatic aberrations part. This actually takes a little bit of time here. So, but so we're almost up here, and then I'll show you exactly how you can adjust some of your settings here. So you can see that this has quite a bit of detail in it. If I click on any portion of the photo, you can actually see, you know, a small portion of the photo. This is just a small portion of the photo that ends up getting pulled into there. And look at the detail in this, you know, the foliage that's over here, the side of the building. You know, this is just an amazing amount of detail in these photographs. And this is the HDR photo that is showing you there. I'm going to hit fit here, make sure that it's fitting the entire photo in there. Now you can see it shows you a histogram, which what this is that in order to, you want to balance the colors out and do various things with that. You might want to look that up on the internet if you're going to try to use that much. It's more for professional photographers, but you can also see photos that, you know, if you're having trouble with them, it's because of the way the colors and the luminosity was captured in the original photos. So you may take some photos that you can't use. But over here on the right, then you'll see a bunch of presets that are various settings of the tone processors that's on the left over here that are presets. So what this does is it's a set of pre-configured settings on the left. So as I click on something on the right, you'll see it change on the left-hand side, and also the photo will change. You can see, now a lot of people, especially professional photographers, think it's a bad idea to use these presets as a starting point. But I think that's ridiculous. It probably was professional photographers who set this up, and so you should be able to start wherever you want to. I usually start somewhere in the neutral area or with some other that looks good to me, and then you start playing with these settings over on the left-hand side here. So I'm going to go ahead and reduce the strength. The strength is the amount that it's doing the tone compression, which you'll see if I move it all the way to the left, the photo loses a lot of its vibrance and a lot of its detail that is pulled from the other photos. So I usually put this at about 70% and maybe a little bit more. The color saturation is going to be the intensity of the actual colors. You are not adding or removing any colors whatsoever. So if I slide it to the left, it's going to pretty much be a black and white photo almost. And if I take it all the way to the right, it's going to just really soak the colors very deeply, as if you were painting with very intense paint. So I usually keep that on the upper end. I like photos with a lot of deep color in it. And then the tone compression, exactly how this works mathematically, I'm not sure, but you just need to play with these different settings to see exactly how it works. And what this does is it's actually adjusting the contrast in a very sophisticated sort of way, I believe. So I'm going to pull this up. Like I said, I like the compression, you know, fairly high also. And then you have different contrast settings for various elements within the photo. You can adjust the contrast in the detail. You also can do it in the dark areas and in the light areas. So you can see how this is affecting my photo here. What I'll normally do is I just slide these around until, you know, I like the way it looks. And then you have some lighting adjustments. Right now it's on medium. This is making adjustments based on what it's finding in the photo. I really don't care for most of these. So you see the way the sky is changing on this. That's one of the main effects that it's having on it. And then you go ahead and you'll scroll down and there are more options. So here you can pull out deep, like if I do that, it will take all the light areas of the photo and it'll intensify them. I'm going to leave that a little bit higher than it was. You can also select these and then use your arrow keys to slide them back and forth and watch the changes. In some cases, you won't see any or barely any change whatsoever. I'm going to darken up the shadows on this a little bit. So you can see by doing that, I'm darkening the shadows. And then, let me see here. You can see the saturation of the color in the highlights and the shadows. You can affect that. The smoothing will smooth out some of the harsh edges if you have those in your photos. So you go ahead and you adjust this however you want. I'm going to actually go back to one of my presets. I sort of like these ones here. And then I'm going to go ahead and say apply. And so what it will do then is it'll go ahead and it'll apply the changes you made to your photo. As I said, you can pull single photos in here, and you can do post-processing on individual photos also. Now, when you get in here and before you finally save the photo, I'm moving Linda's picture around here. If I slide, it gives you the last chance to adjust some of the saturation of the various colors in the photo. You can adjust the contrast. So you can see how it affects those. I'm going to lighten this up a little bit here too. And then you can also do some sharpening on it. I don't really see where this has much an effect very often. But then when you're done, you hit done. And then you can save the photo to save final image, sorry. And then you save it to a folder there. So that gives you an idea of how the software works to an extent. You really, the only way to really learn how the software works is to get in there and play with it. Like I said, I don't have any aspirations to be a professional photographer. I just like to make pictures. And so I'll show you some now of some of the things that I've done in the past.
We did have a comment from one of the attendees that the photo looked otherworldly. So I thought that was an interesting, just because of the richness of the colors, I think.
Yeah, and a lot of these photos are like that. There's criticisms in some cases by professional photographers because they think people over-process these photos. And to me, like I said, to me that's sort of meaningless, because if I like the way it looks, what does it matter? And you'll see a variation of what I've done here in some of my photos. Some of them are very simple, and some of them actually do have that otherworldly quality to them. So I'm going to hit share screen again and try to get back to my PowerPoint. Okay. All right. Am I displaying properly there again?
Yep, we're back in the PowerPoint. I'm not in slideshow mode yet, but we're back in the PowerPoint.
It's not letting me put it in slideshow mode. So let me try that again. I'll put it in slideshow mode first. And I'll go back here, share screen. Okay. All right. You see me now?
Yep, we're on the screen that just has the Photomatics Pro. Yep, now it go the other direction.
All right.
There we go.
All right. So what I'm going to show you here is I took this photo just the other day. I like to take these photos of, some of you may think this is strange, but of water. And what I'm doing here is, you can see this is how your eye would pretty much normally see this picture of this pond. You can see some reflections on the other side. You can see some stuff in the bottom of the pond. And you can see the sun reflecting on the bottom left there. And the shoreline a little bit over on the left. Well, that is the normal exposure. Here's the underexposure. Or, let me see. That is the normal exposure, that middle one. This is the overexposure, and this is the underexposure. And so after I combine these photos together and I do a little bit of processing on it, I came up with this image, and this may look a little bit surreal to some of you. And that's really what I'm after. The colors and the reflections and the detail, or it's texture and color to me. If it looks abstract, that's fine. It keeps my eye moving around and looking in all different places. Now, you see the reflections of the trees up on the other side and the clouds in the background. You also see some clouds in the middle of the photo. Those are actually clouds reflected off the top of the water. And then you can see down through the water into the bottom and see all the different foliage there. And then you have the detail along the left-hand side of the photo with the regular ground. Here's another example of that. If you look closely at this photo, this is some pond weeds. You'll see the trees reflected from the other side of the pond across the water. You also see the blue sky from the background bleeding through it. And also you can see straight through the water to the leaves at the bottom of the pond. So, you know, here's what I'm doing with these photos is I'm trying to create ways of seeing things that are a little bit different. And then the fun is to go out in the world and actually look for things that you can actually do this with. It's just really fun to go out there and do that. Here's another one. You can see the detail in the upper left and then down at the bottom of the leaves at the bottom of the pond, the reflections of the trees and the plants growing up through the surface of the pond. Another example there. These are a little less abstract, lily pads. This was taken in a forest directly into the sun, and you can see the texture of the bark and the details on the photos there. And you would not be able to see those in a regular photo because you're shooting directly into the sun. This I took up in Canada at a lake. I set my tripod up and the guys I was with thought I was nuts because every 5 minutes I would go down and I would shoot 3 more shots. And I'd go down and go down and go down. I took hundreds of photos to get this one photo that came together like that. This is very similar to the photo that I saw that day in the gallery. It was a fall scene like this. And it was printed on canvas, which I haven't done yet, but I'm going to try that with some of these photos. It's just very cool. This is shooting directly down with my tripod into a stream bed. If you look closely, you can see bubbles on the top of the water. And this is very abstract. When people look at this, a lot of people can't tell what it is. I like it. Shot this in Chicago from a balcony. Of my daughter's apartment. If Linda and I our pictures are in the way, the moon is on the right hand side of this photo. Mine was covering it up, but if you move that out of the way, you'll be able to see the moon in the sky there. Shot of Chicago skyline from the top of a building. Incredible amount of detail. You can zoom in on parts of this photo and see the windows on the buildings in the background there on the skyline. Again, this was from the back porch of somebody's apartment. Now, this was actually in Bangladesh when I was there a while ago. I thought I had taken this without HDR, but I did actually take an HDR photograph for this. This is a cobbler. You can see his small little anvil thing there by his right hand, where he puts shoes on there and works on them for people in the village. This was an HDR photo that I took at night behind my house. I could not see the sky when I was out there. These exposures were, I think the longest one was over 2 minutes. And because of the length of the, you can see the windows are all glared out, but I was amazed that I was able to take a photo that had that kind of detail in it at night. And then I'm going to show you a few pictures here that are post-processing only. Just using that software to process a photo that had no. Now I'm going to zoom in on this so that you can see here exactly how much detail there is from the feathers. Did that zoom?
Yep, it did.
Okay.
Is
So
that from your backyard, Frank?
that's, yeah, right in the bird feeder in back of our deck. This is a bluebird. You could really pull the colors out. The sun was glaring all over him, so his colors were looking faded because of the way, and then I was able to get the colors to come right out. This again was in Bangladesh. Shot of a butterfly there, and a macaque monkey that was there. And I encourage you, if you like what you see here and you'd like to explore this further, there is a ton on the internet. You can find tutorials on YouTube that will show you how to set up your own camera to do this. People are very opinionated. Like I said, I try not to be opinionated. I think that as long as you like the way the photos look, you can do whatever you want with them, and you're not selling them unless you want to sell them. And so I have some links here. I'm going to put this up on the internet so Linda can point people at it to download this presentation if you want to look at it and get these links off of it. But I just put some examples of the kind of links that you can see there.
Well, great.
Now, Linda, I don't know what time it is, but if you want to have people be able to ask some questions, it's fine.
Well, we have about, I'd say about 10 minutes because we want to set up for, we do have a repeat session and we do have some folks registered for the second session. I don't know if any of our Houston scholars have any questions. You can use the Q&A function at the bottom of your Zoom screen to submit any questions that you might have. I'll just kind of check that. I had someone say that this makes them want to get a new camera rather than using their phone. They've been using their phone and now they're inspired to go back and start taking pictures with a camera again. So I thought that was interesting.
The iPhone actually has an HDR selection in the photo section of it. I don't know how it works. I think it just does some, AI kind of oriented post-processing on it and really isn't taking multiple exposures, but it gives you some of the effects. But yeah, this is what I went out and bought a new camera for the first time in 20 some years. That's how excited this got me about it.
Well, very cool. Well, I'm really impressed. I'm not seeing any other questions. I'm really impressed with the photos, and I like that otherworldly, knowing that you're a sci-fi fan, as am I, and you think about what other worlds might look like, you can kind of see why this type of photography might appeal to people that like science fiction and fantasy in their reading and in their movies, that this is a really cool fit.
Well, one of the things too is that because you're just manipulating what's really there, what the camera has captured, some people may see the world this way. We don't know how each of us sees the world, and I'm sure there's a lot of variation in the way our eyes work and our brains work, and we're not adding or taking anything away from these photos. We're just manipulating what's already there. So it is a representation of reality.
Oh, sure. Well, and as you say, it's always interesting to kind of have that to practice kind of taking a different perspective or a different viewpoint when we're looking at whether it's books or arguments. So to kind of try and do that same thing with taking a slightly different viewpoint of what might something look like to someone who sees color differently. I've always wondered how our animals see color,
right?
And whether or not they experience it the same way that we do. So you think about what what a view might look like to someone else. I think it's an interesting thought experiment. So, but thank you again, Frank. We really appreciate your participation and your passion, and appreciate you sharing that. For our Houston scholars that might have younger siblings that are interested in some of our read alouds, I would point you back to our URL. We do have our May calendar up. I've got a couple more additions to make, but I think we're pretty good almost through the end of May. And you can visit that website at http:// those are forward slashes, muses3.com/index.php/readalouds/. Or you can go to www.muses3.com and click on the M3 resources, simply scroll down to read alouds and you'll see the calendar. And we'd also like to thank our partner who's helping to publicize and make sure that we're able to kind of get the word out, ESC Region 4, and particularly the Distance Learning Department. So thank you again, Frank. I'll see you in a couple more minutes. And thank you, Houston Scholars. We hope you enjoyed the session today. We'll be recording both this session and the following session, and then actually posting one of the two recordings along with, once I get the PowerPoint from Frank, I'll make that into a PDF so we can go ahead and post that on the website as well. So if you're interested in the links that Frank shared with you, or looking at any of the other photos or any of the other information, that should be posted later today. Thanks again. Oh, I do see we do have another comment on the Q&A. And Miss Monica from ESC Region 4 said, thank you, this is great. So you're welcome. And we hope you enjoyed yourself. And I'll see you in a couple minutes, Frank.
All right. Take care, everybody.